Welcome back to the Student Hub Live. Well, we've been having a great day at our writing masterclass where we've been taking some of the key process words in essays and we've been thinking about how to apply those and your assignments. We've also just been looking at introductions and conclusions, and now in this part of the programme I'm joined by Georgina Blakeley, who's a Director of Teaching in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and has written a lot in DD 102, which is Introduction to the Social Sciences, and we're going to focus on the describe word in an essay.
That's right.
Now, Georgina, we've got some very astute students out there who've been telling us how they underline some of the process and the content words in their essays. They're reading the guidance, so they're doing a lot here. I wonder if we can start by thinking about what this describe word means and where we meet it, because I've been speaking to Paul and Fiona earlier. We've been thinking about critical evaluation and comparing and contrasting, and we've been mindful that sometimes in critical evaluation you're doing a bit of comparing and contrasting and vice versa, and I suppose that description would also be necessary at some points within those, and I'm very keen that we sort of identify for our students who are trying to separate these words and really meet that question, what a descriptive essay is all about.
Yeah, I mean, you come across describe in a lot of level 1 social science essays, level 1 essays across the board. Yeah. And that's because it's the starting point, it's the building block of social science inquiry, of starting to think like a social scientist. So when you get to the compare and the contrast or the critically evaluate, description's in there at the start, because of course you can't compare and contrast something, you can't critically evaluate something without describing what it is you're critically evaluating or comparing and contrasting. So it really is that starting point, that building block for thinking about how you then go on to social science inquiry in a much more sophisticated way.
Now, we've been talking about how some of these words require your own opinion, and that in academic work we mustn't give our own opinion as such, but we're using our interpretation of the evidence to sort of look at things. So even if you're comparing and contrasting, there's some of your own stuff in it in critical evaluation. How much of students' own experiences should be in a descriptive essay? Should it just be a repetition of what's in the book?
Not really, no. And first of all, you must always write in your own words. That's the really most important thing for all of your essays. But in terms of describe, I think it's important to say what it is you have to do when you're describing. What is it you're actually doing? And you're really identifying, picking out key characteristics, key features of the thing that you're describing. Now, obviously, there's always interpretation, because, you know, if you're thinking about singing a song, everybody has their own voice and they all sing it slightly differently. And that's the same when you're writing an essay, and it's good that a student's voice kind of comes out. And sometimes I think it takes quite a while for a student to find their own voice. But that doesn't mean that you're just saying anything, that you're just putting down your opinion. So, of course, you need to kind of have the evidence in there to back up what you're saying, and that applies to describe as well.
Now, you've brought a photograph in.
That's right.
Why?
Rather embarrassing one. Yes, that is actually me in the photograph, hard as it is to believe. Because I think it helps us to understand what we're doing when we're describing something, because it depends on who's asking you to describe and it depends on the purpose. So if we take the photograph as an example, if the police were asking for a description of me, then someone would probably talk about my physical features. Yeah, so if I'm short, tall, my shape, what hair colour, eye colour, because they're identifying me. Yeah, so those are the kind of things that you'd pick out for a police identification process. If a friend was describing me, then perhaps they'd talk about my personality or the things that I like doing. If the description, the purpose was for an employer, well, then they talk about different kind of skills, how I am in the workplace. So it all depends on the process and what's actually being asked for.
So even though you have to meet the question, like our students don't have a choice when they've got one, the aspect of which they're describing, they almost need to frame the purpose, is it, of what that description is all about, in what context?
Yeah, and I think that can be really hard, actually. It's useful to think of a frame, it's useful to think of a lens, to know what to include, to know what to leave out.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're thinking about, you might be asked to describe a theory. And in the books, you might have a lot of detail about the theorist and their life, when they wrote, you know, perhaps their education, the kind of whole sort of historical context. But actually, particularly if you've got not a very large word count, you probably don't want all that context. You want to concentrate on the key features of a given theory. But that's really hard, and it comes with practice.
No, it does, doesn't it? We were talking earlier about introductions framing an argument. Could framing things help then in terms of saying what your purpose is and what you're describing? Is there something that could do to help focus both the student and maybe the reader of the essay so that they're clear then on what the student's trying to deliver?
Absolutely, and that's kind of where the last session I think was really useful, because it's the introduction that provides that frame. It tells the reader what you're going to concentrate on.
Brilliant. Let's take a quick trip to HJ and Peter. How's everything going with you two and everyone back at home?
Well, we're just having a chat about being descriptive, aren't we? And all the different things that could be described differently as a person would be. We could think about things like if you're viewing it from literally a different perspective, it might look different as well. Or if you're, for example, like me, colourblind, you might view everything and describe everything a bit differently as well, or maybe get confused about some things. But
yeah. Renee talks about keeping it in her own words, so making sure that when she's descriptive, it's in her own words and how she would describe it, as opposed to being tempted to borrow it from anyone else's descriptive, how they've summarised it. That's important as well. So.
And based on experience as well, that would be a different way to describe something. It might change the way you view something. So a lot of interesting stuff about descriptions in our chat.
Brilliant. Now, Georgina, we were talking about word length earlier and about how if you've got a 1,000-word essay, you might use 10% or 15% for the introduction and the conclusion. And this point I want to pick up here that's been mentioned about length, how long might this description be? And how do you know when to start and when to stop? Because some things that you might describe could be completely true. I mean, we could spend thousands of words describing what's in this photo, the lighting, what instruments you're holding, etc. But actually, if this was for a police, they don't care about the trombone. They might not. It depends what you've been up to.
Crime, yes.
Assuming it was a crime. But again, how much does one put in and put out? How do you decide then what is important in terms of your description? And how do you communicate that actually you do understand it all, but you're just choosing? It's not that you've forgotten to describe it or that you don't think it's important. How do you confidently assert that?
Well, can we take an example perhaps from DD 102? Don't worry, folks, you're not going to get to this book. It's the second book until after Christmas. But in this kind of final chapter that I co-wrote with John Clark, there's a whole discussion about two theorists, and they're talking about how to govern inequality. They're two very different theorists, so it's a kind of compare and contrast question that is often used for this chapter. But here in the photo, we have one theorist who's Hayek. Now, also you find there's a photo there, so you might want to kind of think about how he looks. There's also a lot of description there about the times when his ideas were popular, what kind of context he was writing in, when they became popular again, so under Margaret Thatcher, under Ronald Reagan, and they actually became popular again, his ideas, sort of after the crash in 2008. And then there's a whole kind of description of the different books he wrote, his different ideas, his different theories. Now, obviously, if you're asked to write, to describe his theory of governing inequality, what do you include, what do you leave out? Now, you probably don't want to include all the information about his university career. You probably don't want to list all of his publications because there are very many. You probably don't want to kind of talk too much about sort of when his ideas were popular. What you want to concentrate on are the key features of his theory. Yeah, so what claims was he making? What concepts was he using? What were his main ideas? You might, however, want to talk about the context in which he was writing, because I think students will find that when you're talking about a different theorist, when they're writing, they're very influenced by what's going on around them in the world. So Hayek, for example, was writing in Austria sort of during the 1930s. So he was very concerned with the rise of fascism. He was very concerned with the rise of communism. And his writing is kind of against that backdrop. So you might think that that piece of context is actually important for understanding his theory.
So might it be then that you might pick something up that related to that context and explain why perhaps that was the case, as opposed to just giving a narrative count of saying, well, the context matters because of this, this and this. It's almost about, I guess, representing some of this in a way that shows your understanding.
Absolutely. You need to say, or to make it very clear to the reader, why you're talking about 1930s Austria.
Yeah.
You're not just describing what was happening then, you're saying this was important because this linked to how he saw the state, for example.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of connect it to the theory.
So description is quite challenging, because even though you can think, well, yes, it's all nice, there's a lot of content here for me to choose from, ultimately you could demonstrate that you don't know what you're on about by including the wrong things, couldn't you?
Yeah, I think it's one of those really difficult process words, actually, that we start off with at level 1, because, as I say, it is that kind of starting point, that building block. But it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And the reason it's hard is because you have to be selective.
Yeah.
It's about identifying the key points. It's about being selective and having the confidence to know what to leave out,
Yeah.
which when you're starting off is really hard. Your tendency is to put everything in,
Yeah.
but you can't do that. It's about identifying what you think are the key points.
Yeah. And as we keep saying at level 1, this you know, is a big learning space, and you will learn from it. So, you know, it should be more important at level 2 and 3 to be very, very confident about what you're describing and really omitting any detail that's not essential for the argument. But at level 1, you'll often perhaps include a few things that maybe you couldn't, maybe make it stronger. But one of the questions that DD102 often asks is, how do we know? And what I want to know then is how one might know that they're including things that maybe are peripheral or not so relevant, if, for example, they're true, or they're maybe not getting comments of that from their tutor because maybe there are other things there. How might students start to sort of think, am I really addressing the question? Could this essay have been just as good with that taken out of it? How can they sort of start to work with their own intuition, I guess, in terms of what should be in the description and what maybe shouldn't?
Well, one key thing is the word length.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, if you're really struggling to keep to the word length, that is probably a sign that you're including too many things.
Right.
Yeah, so the word length is kind of chosen with a purpose, and that is a guide to sort of, you know, really what you should be including and not including. So if you're always going over the word length, that's probably because you're finding it hard to select what's important. In terms of selecting what's important, it's the question. You have to keep going back to the question and thinking, what is it asking me? Is this important to the question? So every paragraph that you write, when you've kind of written it, go back and think, does this help me answer the question? And if not, leave it out. Yeah, so you have to be quite ruthless, I think, in terms of pruning your essay.
So I guess some of that results in good preparation, doesn't it?
Yes.
That delivery of a really nice, sophisticated answer. How would you recommend students try and weigh up then what does help with the argument and what doesn't? Are there any techniques you'd advise? We've been looking at note taking and people have been saying, how do I know what matters?
Yeah, I mean, the tendency, I think, when you get your book is to underline everything.
Yeah.
Because it all looks important.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, you see a student with a book that's all highlighted, it's like, oh no, you've not done very well in terms of kind of selecting what's important there. But in these books, there's lots of kind of things to help you. Yeah, so there's summaries at the end of each section. Now the summary is a kind of clue to what's important. It's highlighting what to look for. So you can use those as a kind of guide to help you start off. Student notes, yeah, we have student notes for every assignment. Again, read them really carefully because there'll be lots of really key hints as to what to include and what to leave out. But I think the most important thing that I'd want from any student is to write in their own words. Yeah. And that's the really hard thing, because they kind of get these books and they look, it's all in black and white, and think, oh my goodness, how can I possibly, you know, write anything that's as good as this? But it's much better to have it in your own words. Even if you don't think it's as good, it doesn't matter, but it's your voice, your own words that are coming through.
And I love that analogy with your song that you're singing, and that's okay, because everyone's got a different way of doing it. But if it's yours, it demonstrates your understanding, which is what the assessment's all about at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, so we're keeping with the musical theme with the trombone. But,
yes, I see.
Okay.
Okay.
Sing in your own voice.
Everyone will be delighted, Georgina, because I think they're sick to death of cake here this morning. So we asked how confident you were that the material that you've left out is irrelevant. So let's have a look and see what you had to say at home. Okay, so quite not very confident. There's quite a lot going on in the middle here. Now, this was before we started talking about this, so I'm not sure if anything shifted, but let's go and see with Peter and HJ what some questions might be that we could help with.
We have one question, which might be a good one to cover off. How do you decide whether to write in the first or third person when describing?
Good question.
That's a tricky one.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm smiling because if you asked 100 tutors, 50 would say, right, using the first person. But actually, I think that my general kind of rule would be actually you write in the third person, because that helps you to kind of move away from your own opinion. You know, I think describe can often kind of lead to the temptation to be quite subjective. Yeah, so if we go back to the photo, you know, describe Georgina, she's very kind. well, maybe, but, you know, provide an evidence, give examples. So I think if you write in that third person, it helps you to step away from that, your own opinion, from being subjective to actually being more objective. So I think it helps with that.
Do you think you can ever combine the two? Like, for example, write an introduction and then in the conclusion go, well, I've shown you all this and I think that on balance, blah, blah and blah. Would you ever recommend mixing the two up or not?
I don't think so. I don't know what kind of your view on that is, Karen, but I think it would jar for me a bit. I think you can still kind of provide, in a sense, your own interpretation, but using the third person.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah.
I think it makes it a lot stronger, the argument as well. It seems more factual if you say this is one hand, this is on the other hand.
Yeah, I think students find it odd because it's not how you normally speak and it's not how you normally write. But I think, you know, rather than saying, I think that this essay has shown, say, this essay has shown. Yeah, it's a way of kind of just removing yourself from it in the writing, I think.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, we've got two other great questions that I'd really like to pick on. Naomi wants to know, what does prescriptive mean in essay writing?
Oh, can we have some more information on that, Naomi?
quite
Perhaps
We'll-
a question.
we'll ask her, yeah. But Jan also wants
question.
to know, what's the best way to structure and link paragraphs together as well? How do we make it all flow nicely?
This is a good thing, because earlier before we were talking about, people were saying we could maybe have some words, and I know students have ones like moreover and furthermore, and we were saying actually write in your own words because it's much more impressive than sometimes trying to shoehorn things in. But what would your suggestion be about linking things together, and again with the emphasis on writing in your own words?
But I think you can use those words as your own words. They don't kind of, in a sense, belong to anyone. So I think, you know, there are words that can link together if the point's the same. You can use in addition, furthermore, moreover. And there's a great list of those on the OU website. Yeah. So when you get stuck, you can kind of go there, or you can use a thesaurus. That's always helpful if you kind of, the words in the book, but you want to move away from it, use the thesaurus and kind of find all the different sort of alternatives, the synonyms for different words. So it depends kind of how many paragraphs you've got in the essay. It depends if you've got points that all kind of more or less agree with each other, or points that are kind of disagree with each other, in which case you'd use, you know, by contrast, things like that. So there's plenty of suggestions, and I would recommend a thesaurus actually, because it really does help. And it shows you just, you know, the variety of words that we can use. We get stuck into the furthermore, moreover. But if you look at a thesaurus, there's lots of alternatives to
and
that.
it doesn't have to be as snazzy as that, does it? I think the key thing is that if you're saying furthermore, it really needs to be a furthermore. You can't just fool someone by putting that in and then raising a completely separate point, because that can sort of jar things as well. So sometimes it's more about actually thinking, well, what am I trying to say and how is this building? Is this like, well, we've talked about this and now let's have a bit of a break and talk about this, or is it, and when you consider this, the plot thickens, and you know, we're all of a sudden into a different, more, you know, important area of the essay. So it's about storytelling, isn't it?
It is, and it's about making sense. And I think one of the best ways to do that, to know that you're making sense, well, there's two things. One is to read it out loud. Because the kind of the rhythm of the natural voice shows you when something just isn't right. Or get someone else to read it. You know, someone who's not a student, you know, your mum or someone in your family. And if they know what you're trying to say, then that's a good clue that you are being clear.
Because you're writing for somebody who knows the material. Like your mum might not know the material, but that she should still get the gist of what you're trying to say. And it can be helpful then to sort of pick up, and she might say, well, what's this all about? And you'll say, oh, actually, I haven't explained it very well. Or maybe it's not relevant. And she doesn't need to know, in which case maybe you might want to take that sentence out.
Absolutely. I think sometimes a mistake that level 1 students can make is to think that they have to write in a very complicated way because that sounds more academic. But actually that's not, if it is, it's a bad academic. You need to kind of write as clearly as possible. Using overlong words just for the sake of it is not what we want. You know, you need to use the words to convey the exact meaning that you want to get across to the reader.
Brilliant. I just wanted, before we wrap up, just check if there are any other questions. I know HJ has put a list of those words in the chat for you at home to look at. So thank you, HJ. And Peter, how's everyone?
Yeah, really good. Some really good discussion, thank you. Yeah, nothing further at this point, though.
Good. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Georgina. That's been incredibly helpful. And I hope you've taken some things from that. Again, take-home points really are about being clear about what you're wanting to talk about, own your own words and your own argument. And it does take time to develop a lot of these aspects. So, yeah, really think, does this help me address the question? And if not, should it be
Exactly.
included?
Be ruthless.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Georgina. We're now going to have a quick video break. We're going to show you another video called Using Sources, and then we'll be back for our next session, which is going to be focusing on referencing. So I'll see you in a couple of minutes for that.